Alright, finishing up week 12, and this would be day 24. Next Tuesday we did this work, and then we had next week was Thanksgiving. So modules, we talked about functions, parameters and arguments, and applying it. Reviewed structure and flowchart issues, talked about sequential files, and had a quiz on arrays. I'll repeat this again in a little bit, but we talk about a main line, and we access other code, and we use pay program as an example. Call a subroutine. In Python, we talk about defining some type of function to do something, which is similar to this. Same idea. Let's look. Actually, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Sequential, conditional, make sure you have a true and false, which way you go. Functions, different processing, I should say, in between there. This is a conditional, and then we talked about case structure, iteration, leading decision, and an iteration with a trailing decision. You'd have a connector, then we'd have our decision. If it's false, you stay in the loop, get out if it's true. True, you stay in the loop, get out if it's false. So let's go back to talking about the main line, accessing pay program. We did an example. We imported this function, or we imported this. It's actually a file that has various functions defined in it. So one was checking for age limit, checking for voters, and doing FICA. So it's just a hodgepodge. But you can think of this as a black box. So using parameters, you can send something in, get something out. All the variables in there are local. If there's little interaction, if everything in the box works on a particular thing, it says to have high cohesion and loose coupling. More on that later on. So in the program, as an example, we can call a particular function. This really wouldn't have high cohesion because it does different things in the box, but each of these defined here could be considered that way. Alright. So on moving on, this would be week 14. Side note, week 13 we did Blender and we had Thanksgiving. This is day 26. Do your best work you can. This tour got pushed back to Wednesday the following week. Tech Brew talked about ISPs and the internet. It was interesting. Okay. We talk about sequential files, access, write, append, module work, talk about key items, and then we work on the assignments. Reply all, Gimlet, Snapchat thief. That's an interesting, it's a very interesting story. Technology driven. So if you want to look that up, it's over an hour long. It's very interesting in terms of, has some security things and just how people use the darknet, a little bit about cryptocurrency and so forth. Anyway, sequential files. Talked about updating sequential files. You could read in the whole file in the memory, make your changes, and then write the whole thing back out. You read it into an array, update the array, then write it back out. We're not going to do any updates in this class, but we do want to write to the file. We want to understand how to write to the file and defend the file. Talked about modules. When we define functions, we want high cohesion, more or less. When you develop this module, you want it to work on a specific thing. You don't want it jumping all over the place. And then for coupling, we want low coupling. As this module, as you send things to it and get things out, you don't want the module dependent on lots of different things in your main code. Basically, you're going to have parameters, and you're going to send your arguments here, get your results back. Variables inside these modules are local. You shouldn't be using global variables inside the modules. More or less all the variables in there are only represented by what's in there. So you send a value into there and get a value out. You don't have this linked to some variable location. Allows us to avoid repeated code, ease in development, and can be very accurate. Talked a little bit about the payroll program, I believe 11 and 12. I talked a little bit about having some type of mainline. Maybe you have the name, you collect some data here, send some data into a function, and get the gross payback. So you can have a function for salary. I believe we have another one, commission, wage, then you have a function for FICA. This would be ideal if you set it up like this. You could put these in separate files or one big file. Then use a mainline program and call the functions when you need them, get the results back. Thinking is not always easy. Seldom easy. Learning is hard. Learning can be. Well, one thing I do know, it requires work to learn something. Okay, enough of that. So now we're on This is still week 14. Day 27. Talked about which ones finish up. We got module work, file access, and then finish up object-oriented programming. Talked again about the importance. You have a main line, import a file that is loaded with functions, it can stand alone, parameters and arguments, send something in, get something back out. We talked about commission, how many cases they produce, hourly rate, salary, weekly. All I gotta do is divide by 52, and FICA, just multiply by some percentage. You want to avoid repeating code, for example, for the FICA. We talked about, I believe it's 13, we have a payroll, so you're going to create a file, we have a number, hours and rate, employee number, hours, rate, and you build a file. And what we want you to do, we want you to be able to add records to that file, use that file to do payroll. So you should be able to use the code you already have designed for hourly payroll. You should be able to use that same code and just adjust it so it reads from the file to produce the output. One last thing to cover. Agile programming. They'll call it a sprint, programming and design. We talked about top-down. You have some challenge or a problem. You make sure you understand it. Analysis, you get all the specs, design it, flowchart, pseudocode, IPO. Then you develop the code, implement, and evaluate. And we create, each one of these, we get feedback, keep getting feedback, and then eventually we create this loop, creating software. Well, a sprint runs through this quickly and then iterates right away. We build some type of prototype. Good example we use with Google Ventures and the Gimlet. Did that Gimlet. I showed the example of the startup. In which they showed the process of doing this. You create a prototype and then you keep iterating that. So you go through your specs, but you go through them quickly and then you build on that. So you get your code to do a specific thing. You get that figured out, and then you can take that and build on it, get it to do something else, and so forth until you get a product, or at least a prototype of your product. Alright, that is it.